This is a demonstration on how to make a slice of cake out of slab, specifically hard slab. So the first thing you'll want to do is to roll out your slabs. Try to get them to be even thickness. Besides rolling them out, you can also toss the slab after you slice it. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can wrap something like a can in paper towel and tape it and use that to roll out your clay. So you can either use the soft slab first or let it get leather hard and use it. I'm going to show you soft slab. So I have templates and I will put them into Schoology. Otherwise you can kind of come up with your own. So you're going to make the top and the bottom piece, 2 of those, and then you will make 2 sides and the back. So this is soft clay, so I'm just going to cut out the form, and you want to conserve as much of the clay as you can so you can use it for other parts of that. So if you have extra clay, it's a really good idea to ball that up, and so you can use that for toppings or other things later. And then to conserve it, I can try to fit the other slice right on here. So it just depends on how much clay you were able to roll out. So you are doing trompe l'oeil, trick of the eye. So your goal here is to try to get it as realistic as possible. So you wouldn't want a teeny tiny piece of cake. So I will put the templates that you can either trace, or if you have a printer, print out into Schoology if that helps you, or you can kind of come up with your own as well. So you have the top and the bottom. You don't necessarily need a bottom. You don't have to have it so it's completely hollow like that, but in case you'd like that, you can. Then I'm going to cut out the 2 sides. So what I like to do is I like to score it first and then cut into it. It's just easier to draw a line first where it's going to be before you actually make the cuts. And if you notice, I like to go right to the edge. It's just easier to do that. And then it's a little easier to use the actual clay piece instead of the paper template to do it when you have 2 of them, because it's firmer. So if you can do it in one cut, that's fine. Otherwise, scoring it and then cutting it. I know that you guys at home have sticks instead of a firm needle tool. Don't use a knife unless you're trying to use a plastic knife. Try to use your stick. If your stick broke or something, you can get those easily at the skewers at the store. They sell them in big packs. Okay, so I have the top and the bottom and the 2 sides, and now I need the back. So the back is just a square. The nice thing about cutting it out of the fresh clay, the plastic clay, is that sometimes the back of a cake slice, usually it's round, especially if the cake pan was round. So that way you can actually bend this a little bit. This extra clay is still good, so you should keep that in your bag if you're using fresh clay. So like I said, that back piece is usually curved a little bit. So I might just take that while the clay is plastic and give it a curve so it looks like the back of a piece of cake. Now, you can add the texture later, or you can try to add it now. So at home you're going to have to look around for something that would work really well. At school I have fire brick that really looks like clay texture. And that's nice to add in before you start to build your form, because it looks a lot more realistic when you have that for your piece ready to go, when it's flat instead of when it's put together. These little white chunks will burn out in the kiln. I'm not worried about them, because you're really going for trompe l'oeil here, or trick of the eye, to try to get it to look like actual cake, actual food. So this looks like the texture of a piece of cake. This would also work if you were going to do like Cheetos or things like that. So that's what I'm doing for this one. At school, at home, you can just look around and try to find some thing that you can use to create texture with. If you don't have something to stamp into the clay like I'm doing here, you can use your stick and kind of create your own texture the best way that you can. Okay, since this has a bottom, I can start with the bottom. So it is good to let it firm up a little bit. So this is really wobbly. This one is completely leather hard. So I would kind of go in between those two. I'm going to use the soft one because this one got a little too dry sitting out. But you can build this piece of cake slice soft too. It doesn't have to be leather hard. It just helps if it's firmed up a little bit more. So you would think that you would just start attaching. But when you do that, if you put your pieces together, you're going to have some weird overlaps like the bottom there. So what we do is we cut bevels. So I'm going to leave that part. Looks like a piece of pie there. You could do pie too this way. So at home, your serrated rib, using the edge of your serrated rib, you would cut a 45-degree angle. We did this with the slab houses. But at school, I have Sgraffito-like tools that are really good for cutting bevels. So bevels are 45-degree angles, and they help your piece for a slab box, or like when we did the slab house, go together a lot more evenly than if you were just to slip and score the ends together. So if you cut them and bevel the edges like that at 45 degrees, when you go to put it together, it'll go together much better than that. So it's very important that you're slipping and scoring. And remember, I just use the scoring tool and slip together at once. If your slip is starting to get dry, just add a little bit of water to it and let it sit. So any parts that are touching, you have to slip and score, or they will not attach in the firing. And if you're at home, it's really important that you keep this in a Ziploc. So besides slipping and scoring like we did with the house, it's a really good idea to take some of that extra soft clay that you have and roll out a coil or press in clay into the seam and just smear it with your thumb, because otherwise you tend to get cracks, and you should do that on the inside, the outside, the corner. You can also, if your slip is kind of thick like mine is, you can take some thick slip, and then that texture you can reapply now or try to get back in there later to help it look the most real, because we're going for trompe-l'oeil, trick of the eye. So the next step is to slip and score both parts that are going to be touching. So the side and the base here, and then actually this part will be touching too. So I'm going to put it on the top because I can always trim some more off. If it's too big, it doesn't work as well. And then again, either really thick slip, like I'm doing here, or some soft coils or soft clay. You want to smear into those seams, inside and out. It's very important that you do that, because you know that with slab, from the slab houses, that if you don't do that, that can cause a problem. I also like to take my scoring tool and score the seams, especially because I'm going to be putting a lid on this, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing on this side of the piece of cake. Always slip and score any parts that will be touching. So it's a little tall, but I can always cut that off. So I'm going to pinch these corners together, and then I'm going to smear soft clay. My slip is really thick, otherwise soft clay works. Don't use runny slip. And I'm also going to put it down here. So it's kind of like you're making a box, and you could actually turn this into a little box that looks realistic too, if you wanted to make the lid removable. So again, you can either put the texture in now, or you could come back later and add some of that texture. Don't forget to do the end. You can kind of just pinch it together and take some soft clay and just smear it with your finger and thumb. Now the base doesn't look quite right, so I can go in there and I can either take soft clay or really thick slip and fill it. Kind of looks like frosting anyway. I like watching cooking shows because they remind me of ceramics a lot. They're making things. Okay, now I technically could just leave this hollow. So to make this even, I can use my scoring tool or even your wire tool or if you have a knife at school like I have, if you need to trim any away to make it even, you can carefully do that. And then check for any other seams that might be filled in. So again, I really like to score things together and then apply really thick slip or soft clay. And then your texture. You can also add texture onto the piece too. So this would be okay because you're making a sculpture if you didn't want to add the base. Otherwise, you could add the base to it. If you add a base to it, you'll need an air hole for it to escape, air to escape from it. If you want to make a lidded jar, you can't just have a piece of slab because it would slide off. You would need to put in what we call little flange pieces. So you would put in pieces like this all the way around so that the lid wouldn't slide off if you wanted to make a lidded container. But since this is a sculpture project, you don't have to necessarily do that. It is very important that you are doing good craftsmanship and really attaching things well. And then when it firms up a little more, I can go back and do some smoothing. So that's the basic start, but it looks more like a chunk of cheese than a piece of cake. So I would need to go in and refine it. Now for frosting, we can use thick slip. So if you're at home, you might need to take some chunks of your dry clay and let it sit overnight, and then take away the water on top and use the thick stuff on the bottom. At school, I have colored slip, this one's white, that I've added some clay to make it really thick, like frosting. Then I spooned it into a Ziploc, just like if you've ever frosted anything at home. And then I cut the corner off the Ziploc. So you might test it because sometimes it's either too runny or too thick. So you could test it on a piece of paper or something and see if it flows nicely. So if you've ever decorated a cake or done it, it's called piping. So you can do some piping. This also would work really well for a cupcake. You could also do whipped cream on top. It works really good for whipped cream. So if you wanted that, some air trapped in there, you could do some whipped cream. Now this is a lot wetter than the actual piece, but if you let it sit for a little bit, it'll firm up too before you put it in your Ziploc. And then it would be really fun if you could bring it in to fire it, and then if you're at home, you could paint it with watercolor once it's bisque fired. At school, you'll decorate it with underglazes. So that's how you make a slice of cake.